What's up guys, Brad here, and in this video I wanted to discuss the PC port of Death Stranding and talk about how it compares to the PS4 Pro version. So before we get started, if you're new to the channel, I post home theater and gaming related videos every single week, including equipment reviews such as speakers and monitors, as well as graphics and performance reviews on video games just like the one you're watching now. So please consider subscribing and hitting that bell notification so you'll be notified whenever I upload a new video. So this actually won't be a side-by-side comparison with the PS4 Pro because unfortunately I don't have a way to capture high quality footage from the PlayStation 4 Pro. I could use the internal capture on the console itself. However, the compression and artifacting that comes along with it really doesn't lend itself well to comparisons such as these. Now, I did play through the majority of the game on the PS4 Pro when it first came out, probably around 75 to 80% of the game. So I am well aware of how the game looks. I did go back through a little bit of it before I started shooting this video, just to familiarize myself with how the graphics and stuff look on that console. So let's go ahead and kick things off with audio quality, and as expected, it's identical to the PS4 Pro version. Dialogue is clear and crisp and intelligible. Voices sound natural and don't sound distorted or anything like that.
Ready to take the plunge? So, the only things you can bring with you is yourself, and maybe a few other trinkets that are really important to you.
The use of LFE and bass effects is pretty awesome in this game. It's not overdone, but there are a lot of effects that take place, such as when you attach a Cupid to one of the new locations that you go to and bring that location into the chiral network. There's this really nice mid-bass slap. It's both like in maybe the 150 hertz to 200 hertz region, as well as, you know, the 30 to 50 hertz region that really kind of hits you in your chest and makes you feel it, which I honestly never skip those scenes because I just think they sound so cool. The game does have great dynamic range, but at times the sound effects can be a bit too overly loud. So if you're setting your volume where voices sound natural, the sound effects will come in and really pierce through your ears, especially if you're wearing headphones. Now, unfortunately, there's no way to go into the menu and adjust those settings. There's just a master volume control and another control that just optimizes for either speakers or headphones, as well as what BB's voice comes out of. Moving on to graphical quality, and one of the first things I noticed right off the bat was that there are no upgrades to texture quality at all. Not that I can see anyway. Especially in cutscenes where we see close-ups of characters like Fragile and Sam, the objects on their suit and things on them just look really low res and kind of crappy, honestly. I was really hoping we'd see an upgrade in that area to improve those textures, especially if you're playing at 4K. But as of right now, they just kind of look blurry and just really low res and last gen almost in certain aspects. Draw distance and level of detail does seem to be much improved over the PS4 Pro version, with things being rendered further out into the distance and far less pop in when you're walking around the terrain and stuff like that. It's really great to kind of see stuff off in the distance already rendered out, right down to grass, rocks, and debris and stuff on the ground, which does actually seem to be a little bit more dense than the PS4 Pro version, but unless you're doing a side-by-side comparison, you're probably not gonna notice. Reflections don't really seem to be upgraded at all from the PlayStation version, with reflections on water and things like that looking nearly identical. Now, honestly, I was really expecting an increase in overall resolution in the screen space reflections, such as on water and in mirrors and stuff like that. But we don't really have any of that here, and there's really only a toggle, I believe, to turn that off in the game. Now, shadows do get a slight bump in overall quality with far less dithering than it was on the PlayStation version, meaning that shadows in general look cleaner and more crisp. This isn't really a huge noticeable difference in game, but it is there and I felt it was worth mentioning. Death Stranding does support HDR on PC. You do have to go into Windows itself and turn HDR on, or you won't get that option from within the menu in Death Stranding. I did find the HDR to be fantastic, just as it was on the PS4 Pro, though what I liked a little more granular control over the settings themselves. It really just gives you a brightness slider for overall brightness of the image. You can go in and adjust brightness like you would in an SDR signal but those you normally want to leave alone because that will just throw off the gamma of the whole thing. Now, I did play this on my 1440p monitor, which is the BenQ EX2780Q. Now, this monitor will accept a 4K 60 signal in HDR, and I'll talk about that in a second, performance-wise. Just know that in order to enable higher resolutions within the game's menu, you have to go into Windows or NVIDIA's control panel and change the resolution there before you start the game for those options to be unlocked. Now, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of graphical options here to adjust, just your basic overall settings. There's no real granular control here to really dial things in for your specific system. Now, moving on to performance, and for reference, the system I'm using is a Ryzen 5 2600 with 32 gigabytes of DDR4 memory clocked at 2933 megahertz, a 2070 Super Founders Edition, not overclocked at all, and I am running at 1440p for the majority of my playtime. With all the graphical settings set to their maximum outside of memory streaming, which I left at default, using the standard TAA implementation, I was getting between 70 and 100 FPS depending on the scene and location and things that were going on. I saw some, slight dips here and there. Now, with that said, cutscenes are locked to 60 frames per second, which honestly isn't really that big of a deal. They still look smooth, they still look great. Just as soon as you jump back into the game, it will unlock your frame rate again and you're good to go. Sharpness and overall detail using the TAA option is okay. Now, the detail itself is there. It looks really, really detailed. However, there's a real issue with aliasing using this method, even at 4K. I noticed things off in the distance, even things up close, had many, many jagged edges, which honestly is kind of weird. I don't understand why that's happening, but just know that you are not the only one. A lot of people are just saying, hey, is TAA even working? It's turned on in the menu. I'm still seeing a ton of jagged edges. Now, switching over to DLSS using the quality preset will correct most of those things at the expense of a little bit less detail. But most of the aliasing, I would say at least 95 to 98% of it is completely eliminated. Now, DLSS isn't perfect. I did notice some sharpening and edge halos on distant objects as well as objects up close, probably due to the AI upsampling and sharpening that it does. But I do want to say that I've noticed it on every single DLSS 2.0 game that I've tested, from Wolfenstein Youngblood to Control. Both of those games had that same issue. I also noticed some weird ghosting artifacts from time to time, especially on high contrast items. So like a black object against a white background, if it moved, there would be an obvious weird motion trailing artifact. Even on things like wires that are swaying from buildings and cranes and stuff like that are really, really noticeable. Now, as I stepped up to 4K resolution, and using DLSS, I noticed it less and less, but at lower resolutions, it's much, much more obvious that it's there. Now, in terms of overall performance using DLSS, in quality mode, I was getting between 10 and 30 frames per second on average with that setting enabled. Switching the resolution to 4K and setting DLSS to quality mode, I was getting a nearly locked 60 frames per second with some dips here and there, mainly in combat and when traversing on the reverse strike, especially if I was boosting. Now, these dips were very, very minor and they only happened for about a second. So I think they might actually be related to loading, but I did feel it was worth mentioning. And finally, moving on to bugs and issues, one of the biggest things that I think most people have noticed is there's a lot of micro stutters in the game, and I want to talk about that for a second. So initially, I did a previous video about how your controller is actually tanking your performance in Death Stranding. And what was happening is within Steam, there's a controller configuration setting that you have to go in and uncheck for Xbox and PS4 controllers. And by doing that, you regain most of that performance back. Actually, you regain all of that performance back. I don't even know why I said that. So you're getting 30 to 40 frames per second more most of the time than if you would if you had your controller plugged in. Now, this is another one of those strange bugs that I don't really know what's causing it, but if I have DLSS enabled, or like I said just a moment ago, if I boot back into the game and it's reverted back to TAA, I can re-enable DLSS. However, I won't get a performance boost for some reason. And I've verified this over and over again. So if I'm in the game and I have DLSS enabled, and then I disable it for whatever reason, I wanna make sure I'm getting my performance boost, my frames per second boost, I go in and I disable DLSS and turn TAA on. It'll get rid of the performance boost. It'll go back to what it would be without DLSS, obviously. Then I go back to the menu, enable DLSS on the setting I had before, go back into the game, and now I'm getting the exact same value at frames per second wise that I was getting using TAA. So what's going on there? Now, the only way I've found to fix this is make sure you're on DLSS, save your game manually, quit the game, close Steam, open Steam back up, and restart the game, and it should default back to DLSS, and you should get your performance boost. It's really, really weird. I will say that doing that in the game, going from DLSS to TAA back to DLSS, you won't get that performance boost, but you will see a reduction in GPU performance. So another issue that I faced was I started the game using an Xbox One controller, and what I noticed is after about 10 hours of play, I started getting double button presses and sometimes even random button presses that would just happen out of nowhere. So basically I would be getting in a vehicle and Sam would get right back out. Or I would equip a weapon or a grenade and it would just automatically unequip. So it was double pressing those buttons for whatever reason. Now switching over to a wired PS4 controller solved all those issues. I've been playing for another 15, almost 20 hours with the PS4 controller. I haven't had a single issue since doing that. And I haven't read of anybody experiencing that with a mouse and keyboard, so if that's your preference and you like that, then you shouldn't have an issue there. And finally, the last issue that I've been experiencing is after 3 to 4 hours of constant play, I get a random access violation crash with a DX12 error. Now, this is honestly a common error. Like, I've researched it and people are experiencing this too in varying degrees throughout the game. Some people get it after half an hour, some people get it after 5 hours, some people can't even boot into the game and, you know, play the game that they paid for, which is honestly unacceptable. The one thing that I haven't tried is disabling DLSS. Now, I've read that people have had success doing that, but I haven't tried that yet, and I may or I may not. Honestly, at this point, it's not really that big of an issue because I normally take breaks after 2 hours of play, but if I do start experiencing it more frequently, then I'll definitely give that a shot. So really, there's a ton of issues with this game, and should you buy it right now? I mean, if you're a big Kojima fan and you just can't wait, then yeah, go for it. Definitely look around and try to find the best price. If you can wait, I'd say definitely hold off. The game is severely buggy for a lot of people right now, and I'd really hate for you to go out and spend 60 bucks of your hard-earned money for a game that you potentially can't even play. So definitely wait until it's patched. There are a lot of things that need to be fixed. The one that I think needs to be addressed like right away is the bug that prevents people from even booting the game. So imagine spending that $50 or $60 of your hard-earned money and not even being able to play the game. Like, you've had it for a week and it's just sitting on your hard drive, not even being able to be accessed, which is honestly unacceptable at this point. I know we have a COVID thing going on right now and people are, you know, things are not getting done as quickly as they used to, but you know, this is a service, this is a product that you are buying that you should have expectations for, that it should just work. And I know nothing is perfect, but a lot of these issues seem like they could have been prevented, and it just seems like they pushed the game out knowing that these issues were there, even though it was delayed for a month and a half, which would have given them a bit more time to squash a lot of these bugs before they even released the product. But as it stands, graphics are pretty good. I would really like to see a texture pack or something that comes out that had higher resolution textures, even if it meant slightly less performance. It would just look a lot better. The game does look beautiful. It has a lot of, you know, great looking vistas and landscapes and things like that, but some of the textures just still need some work. Audio quality wise, it really needs some individual settings because those sound effects are just too darn loud sometimes. So hopefully these will be addressed in a future update, but some of these may be design choice decisions. I know Kojima is very, very much perfectionist and has a vision and doesn't like people messing with that. But at the same time, you know, I would like to tailor the experience to what I want to play, and I'm sure a lot of you as well would like to do that. Thank you everyone for watching, and I'll see you in the next one where I go to eat a pear for the very first time, and I think it tastes gross.
Of course it's gross! It's a sticker! I eat stickers all the time, dude!